Jamal, if you pin your face right now, your box, it makes your screen full size.
All right, awesome. You said if it does what?
If you pin, well, it did a minute ago, now it's you, but it was when you were screen sharing, if you just right click on the three dots and you click on pin, it put your screen in the big box.
Got it, okay. And then you also have the option to click on side mode, yep. So can we just, I think while we're working out these small technical kinks, if we can go around and do some introductions, that'll be helpful. We've already introduced you to us. We'll start with Martha from FCA. If you want to just say your name and tell us about who you are and sort of like your experience with FCA. We'll spend about 30 seconds on each person and move on, and we'll just popcorn around the room that way. Let's begin with Martha.
Martha, you're on mute.
There you go, you're on mute.
Hi, I'm Martha Small. I'm a pediatrician in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I've been on the FCA board for 3 or 4 years now. I've been helping out with some of their COVID policies, and I'm very interested in all of these topics that we're about to discuss.
Thank you. Let's go to Bob, Family Centers.
Hi, I'm Bob Arnold. I'm CEO at Family Centers, and been here for a long time. Don't know what else to say. I know most people or many people here.
Yep. Okay, let's go to Ann.
Hi, I'm Ann Kroll. I'm also a member of the Family Centers Board for quite some time.
Awesome. Ted.
I'm Ted Pardo. I'm on the board of Building One Community. I serve as treasurer of that wonderful organization. I'm also an Episcopal priest at a church in Greenwich, St. Barnabas Episcopal Church, and got my attention grabbed at Union Theological Seminary on 9/11/01 when I began my Master's of Divinity studies there. With a great diverse group of fellow seminarians, and looking forward to our process together.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go to Rita.
Hi, I'm Rita. I am a member of the Board of Family and Children's Agency. I'm on the Board of Governance Committee and the Fund Development Committee. I've been on the board for over 10 years, and when it's over 10, I stop counting, so I'm only 12 years old.
Gotcha.
So that's who I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen from AOK.
Hi, I'm Helen Blank. I'm an enthusiastic member of the board of All Our Kin, and have known and worked with Jessica Sager for many years.
Thank you, Helen. Carl from Family Centers. Take yourself off of mute, Carl.
Sorry, should have known that. Carl Goodnow, I'm on the Family Centers board, and I've been on the board, well, I guess I'm part of the furniture and structure at this point. I've been on the board a long time and have enjoyed every single minute and have learned a tremendous amount through the years, and look forward to learning more participating in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to Susan from FCA.
Hi, I'm Susan Bayman. I serve on FCA's board. I've been on the board for about 4 years, I think. I co-chair risk management and serve on the governance committee, and I'm so happy to be here today. I'm so glad that we're doing this. I live in Norwalk. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Chrissy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chrissy Kikase. I am an employee at FCA, and I oversee grants, program development, and quality improvement. And I'm also a proud co-chair of our social justice committee at the organization. So I'm very excited to be here and that we're doing this work.
Nice. Is it Andrea?
Yes. Good morning. I'm Andrea Vacas. I'm the VP and Chief Development Officer at Family and Children's Agency. I've been with the agency just over 3 years. I'm happy to be here.
Nice. All right. Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Moran. I'm on the board of Family Centers, but those of you who are on the board have probably never seen me because I mostly just do special projects for Bob. And really excited to be doing this work. And this will probably bring me back to board meetings. Thank you.
Love it. Mary Ellen?
Good morning. I'm Mary Ellen Hass. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Family and Children's Agency. And I came here 13 years ago after merging my small organization in with Family Centers. So I guess that makes me their cousin. And I also, like Bob, know a few people here today. I was lucky enough to be approached in 2012 by 4 brave souls at FCA who wanted to start the social justice work. And Chrissy is one of the proud co-chairs of. So I'm delighted to be here today and looking forward to the work.
Nice. Thank you. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Coughlin. I am the CEO of Person to Person.
Thank you. Martha. No, we did Martha already. Jerry from Person to Person.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Garone. I'm the Chief Community Relations Officer for Person to Person. I recruit volunteers and strive to develop authentic relationships with our generous communities. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you. Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob Cashel. I'm the CEO of Family and Children's Agency, where I've been for a little over 15 years. Prior to that, spent a little bit of time at Family Centers. And I'm looking forward to the morning.
Nice. Ashley?
Hi, good morning. My name is Ashley. I'm a clinician. I work at Domus, and right now I am helping to integrate a therapeutic initiative across programs. I've been there for 12 years now.
Nice. Jolene?
Hi, my name's Julene Greenshields. I'm with FCA. I'm Chair Emeritus. I've been there, I think, for around 15 years, as long as Rob has. I've been on the board. And I'm looking forward to working together this morning and learning more about diversity and equity and inclusion.
Nice. Thank you. David?
Hi, I'm David Van Dyke. I'm on the Family Centers Board and chair our Healthcare Connections Center of Excellence. I'm also a Presbyterian minister in Stamford at the Fish Church. And I also serve presently on our Presbytery's Anti-Racism and Equity Committee. So this is going to help me there too.
Thank you. All right. Anika?
Good morning. My name is Anika Campbell. I'm on the staff of All Our Kin, so I'm the Talent and Equity Director of the organization. Very excited to be here, and I can't wait to start unpacking.
Nice. Thank you, Anika. Nikki Rose?
Hi, good morning. I'm Nikki Rose. I'm on the board of Family Centers. Thrilled to be here this morning. I think it's going to be awesome for our organization and awesome personally too. So thanks for having us.
Nice. Thank you. Anka?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anka, the Executive Director at Building One Community. I'm really delighted to be here with my core team and everyone. I'm ready to work today.
Michael?
I take it that's Michael Hyman. I am a member of the board at Person to Person and a part of our Diversity and Equity Task Force. I also serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Domus. I'm also co-chair of Stanford Stands Against Racism.
Nice, thank you. And from Building One Community.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Downey. I'm board chair at B1C and looking forward to working with all of you this morning.
Appreciate that, and thank you, Nicole. From AOK, yeah.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a board member of All Our Kin, and I also lead the Institute for Women's Policy Research in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. All right. Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Sager. I'm the CEO of All Our Kin, and I am so glad to be spending the morning with you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Same here. Michael.
Assuming it's me. Hi, this is Mike Duggan from Domus. I've been with Domus many, many years. Good to be here this morning.
Thank you. Yvonne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Yvonne Suko with Building One Community. I'm a staff member there and will be actively participating in our racial equity initiatives.
Nice, thank you. All right, Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Casserly. I'm the board chair at Family Centers, and I'm delighted to be here this morning and looking forward to our work today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. Walter from AOK.
Morning, everybody. I'm Walter. Fortunate and humbled to be on the board of the amazing All Our Kin. And in the day job, I am a professor at the Yale Child Study Center.
Nice. Thank you, Walter.
Thank
Paige.
Hi, everybody. I'm the board chair at All Our Kin, have been for many years, and been excited to watch the organization grow. In my day job, I work at Achievement First, and excited to spend the day with you all.
Nice, thank you. Catherine.
Morning, everybody. I'm Catherine Gehrman at Lone Pine Foundation. I've been here with the team and Lucy for about 11 years, and we are just absolutely thrilled to be able to have all of you here today with us for this opportunity, and we are excited to learn alongside you as well.
Awesome, thank you, Catherine. Sean from FCA.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean. I first got involved in a board capacity with FCA about 4 years ago through their junior board of directors, and then joined the full board about 1.5 years ago. But my ties to the agency go much further back. I have a younger sibling who's a school teacher outside of Boston who was actually adopted through FCA's international program back in the early 80s. So delighted to be here alongside all of you this morning.
Thank you. All right, Mary M.
I'm guessing that could be me.
Yeah, they're two Marys, I think.
And they both are Mary M.
Oh, they both are Mary M. Okay, Mary M from Family Centers. Go ahead.
Right. No, I've gone ahead already, so I'm gonna.
You went already? Okay. So then there's Bill from Family Centers.
But wait, what
Wait,
about me?
the other Mary.
The other Mary. Okay, so let's get the other Mary. I'm like mixed up here with these boxes. They keep changing over.
You have
Where's
too
the other
many
Mary?
Marys.
There we go.
Yes,
Mary,
okay.
go ahead.
All right, so I'm Mary Moore-Beer. I was a founding member of Building One Community, and I'm now currently on my second term on the board. I grew up in the segregated South. I lived through school integration, and I'm very interested in this seminar.
Got you. Thank you. Thank you. Bill, are you next? Did we get you yet?
Happy to go, Jamal. Good morning, everyone. Bill Brucker, Senior Vice President overseeing communications and strategy at Family Centers. Very excited to be a part of this group and working on this very important issue. And in addition to the work in communications and strategy, I also facilitate our racial equity and justice work internally at Family Centers. So this is a great group to be a part of.
Thank you, Bill. Victoria. She may not have a working mic, I'm not sure.
Hi.
There we go.
Hi, Victoria D. Toledo. Sorry I'm a little late. I'm going to be in and out because we are babysitting for our 4-year-old granddaughter because of the snow days. So I have been involved in civil rights employment discrimination for 40 years. I'm a lawyer representing people who've been discriminated against in employment. This is so near and dear to my heart, racial justice. I'm thrilled to be a part of this.
Nice, thank you, Victoria. Cheryl from FCA.
Morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Devonish. I am a board member at FCA and very excited to be here today.
Thank you, Cheryl. Alvaro.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Alvaro Alonso. I am board member in Person to Person, and also I'm President and General Manager of Bayersdorf, a German company located here in Wilton, and part of the Diversity and Inclusion Council in my company.
Sure, thank you. Joel from Henkel.
Hey there, everybody. I've been on the board for FCA for about 6 months now, but my day job, stealing somebody else's line earlier, is leading our HR team for our laundry business as part of Hinkle, which is actually a German-owned company, but we have about 2,000 employees here in Hinkle. And of course, DE&I is a big push right now for us as well, always has been. We've had some pretty good roots, but a lot of room for improvement. And of course, I'm committed to making that change for all the right reasons. So I'm excited to learn more here and contribute how I can.
Nice, thank you. Lisa from FCA. Did we just lose you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to unmute. I'm Lisa Lilly from FCA. I am the immediate past board chair, and I'm excited to get to work today.
Sure. Mary S. from Building 1.
Hi, everybody. As you noted, I'm on the board of Building 1 Community. I'm also a volunteer there, and I've been fortunate to serve with Michael and Anka, and I think some others on this call too, in Stanford Stands Against Racism. I'm also a Superior Court judge and active with the National Association of Women Judges, where I serve on a committee devoted to eliminating systemic racism through our judicial systems.
Nice.
Look forward to listening and learning today.
Thank you. Same here. Rebecca from AOK.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Gonzalez, CEO and founder of Time to Learn Daycare in New York. I'm part of different boards, but very proud to be board member of All Our Kin.
Thank you. Craig from Domus.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for my frozen camera. I am in fact here and I'm not sitting this still. I've been with Domus for 22 years. And I lead the educational programs and development for the organization, and excited to participate in this process.
Nice, thank you, Craig. Lucy from Lone Pine.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucy from Lone Pine, and I've been with Lone Pine since its inception, 20 years, and partnering with many of your organizations for almost as long. And I'm just so inspired to see the folks that I know and all the folks that I don't know, and meet you all and see how committed everyone is to this issue and learning together. Looking forward to it.
Nice. Thank you. Lauren from Person to Person.
Hi, I'm Fran Chamorro. I'm the Chief Programs Officer of Person to Person. I manage the Human Resources Department, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Lauren. Kim from Family Centers.
Hi, I'm Kim Kispert, Family Centers Board. I've been on that board now for just over a year, I think. It's hard to tell because I only had a couple of in-person meetings and then we've been on Zoom ever since. But this is actually my second tour of duty on that board. I was on quite a few years ago and then had been off for some time. But Bob Arnold is always very persuasive, so he convinced me to come back, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert from Domus, did we get you?
How you doing, Jamal? Robert Green. I've been a board member at Domus for a little under 10 years, and I'm very excited to be with you today.
Thank you, Robert. Lynette, did we get you from AOK? There we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynette Fraga. I am on the All Our Kin board, and I am also the CEO at Child Care Aware of America, and glad to be here today.
Thank you. And then Virgil from Person to Person.
Virgil Williams, board member, Person to Person, and I'm also serving on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, and I apologize for the frozen screen.
Sure. Dr. Christie.
Good morning, everyone. Michael Christie, board member, Domus.
Thank you. So did we miss anyone? Is there anyone that did not get a chance to do their introduction? I know the boxes have been moving around here, so feel free to jump in if you didn't have a chance. Wow, so we were able to get everyone. Good, okay, so hopefully your introductions will not be the last time that I hear you speaking over the next 4 workshops together. I'm using a different machine to share my screen. Can you see this screen a lot better than the last one? Okay, I see some thumbs
Yes.
up.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully this will resolve our issue in the short term. By the next workshop, I'll be back to my other setup. So hopefully it'll work a lot better for us. Just some background on who we are for those of you who are new to getting to know us. As I mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Partners. I'm also the founder and executive director of Minority Inclusion Project. And essentially, both organizations, the nonprofit as well as the consulting business, have been focused on racial equity We've been doing this work now for 6 years. We're excited to do that work, and it's really driven by a very personal endeavor on my end. I grew up in New York City in the 80s and the 90s. I'm 41 years old. Experienced a lot of interesting race-related issues in my lifetime. Clearly, growing up as a person of color, there's an experience that we have in this world that's very unique. And very early on, when I was in high school and college, I started doing sort of groups that were focused on empowering people of color to be able to take leadership in our communities. And so after so many years of working in the nonprofit sector, I made the decision to start Minority Inclusion Project as an extension of like my own passion to see pathways to leadership for people of color in the sector. And then Thought Partners really developed because folks were asking for things that existed outside of the realm of the mission of MIP. And, I made myself available to do that. So functionally at the core, what we want to do is dismantle institutional racism. And part of doing that is that I see myself as a thought partner, as someone who works with people to help them to think through the challenges of institutional racism. And frankly, the way racism not only shows up in our institutions, not to villainize individuals, but really how it shows up in our society as a whole, and how we have to do more, right, to dismantle it. And the question becomes what? The what? How do we do that? And so we get to that point at some point in our process, but we make it a point to really take you through a change process that's focused on identifying, calling out systemic racism, institutional racism, structural racism, our own individual racism, and then using that as a way to start to address and deal with some of the issues. We work with nonprofits, we work with foundations, municipalities, a number of different size businesses, for-profit and nonprofit as well, school districts, colleges, universities, and the demand for our work continues to grow, but we find ourselves being more discerning about who we work with, particularly because we recognize that, some of you have mentioned that, you've been doing work or been around folks who've been doing social justice or DE&I or ED&I or however it is you frame it, this type of work for a number of years. And frankly, our job, we don't want to come in and continue to do the status quo. We don't want to do what's already been done. We want to challenge ourselves and challenge you to do something different. And we know that to really do the work in a meaningful way means to step into some territory that may be a bit uncomfortable for all of us. So it's very important that as we go through this process with you, that we're taking you through something different, that challenges the way you might see yourselves and challenges the way you might run your business, to actually shift the way you might do business. In some cases, we always have folks in the room who kind of consider themselves to be really far on the journey towards sort of understanding these things. And, I understand social justice, I understand racial justice, and they feel like they've come a long way. But at the same time, we also have a lot of people in the room in most cases that are not very far along. And so how do you approach a room like that, where you have such an interesting curve in which some people are so much further along than others? The reality of it is that we focus less on what you know in terms of your book knowledge or how many books you've read or how many movies you've seen or how woke you consider yourself to be or not. What we're focused on is really coming up with ideas for where we can share values, share ideas, share beliefs, and share progress. And so in any situation, I like for you to think about this journey that we're on or that we're beginning on together is we're going to get on this bus, right? And we're going to take this journey toward racial equity. We're on this, we're trying to advance our ways towards, and on that bus, there are different people at different skill sets and different levels. So we're not asking you to be perfect. We're not asking you to speak perfectly. We're not asking you to have read the types of books we've read or have them all read. You may feel really well-versed. You may feel really competent in this subject matter, or you may feel quite incompetent as it pertains to this subject matter. What we're more concerned about is your value system, your belief system, your connection to wanting to see change. Because ultimately, if you can tie yourself back into that, then the what we do and the how we do it will make more sense over time, okay? So we're not here to judge you. We're not here to beat you up. And ultimately, what we want to see is we want to see more collaboration, more cohesiveness, and more understanding. But that won't come if we approach the work from a perspective that we're just going to, shake people up or shame them or guilt them or anything like that. And there's a lot of research to back the fact that just doesn't work. So we have designed an anti-racism framework called React for Change. And React for Change is a process. It's a process. It's a paced process in which we are taking you through a number of different key steps The core of it being that we want to begin with some basic acknowledgement work, and really the challenge of that is, oftentimes we don't know what we don't know. We operate within bubbles where we don't see what we don't see, and even the ways in which we can be harmful in situations we don't always recognize. So part of the work of acknowledgement work is really stepping back and getting to understand who we are, how we show up, how our identity affects the places that we work in. What are the cultures of our organizations? What are the cultures of our boards? Culture being the way things are, what we believe, our norms, our values. And how does that perpetuate itself in the way that we make business decisions? How does it perpetuate itself in the way we make our personal decisions and our hiring decisions and our the way it shows up in the way we recruit our networks? When we were asked to come to the table initially for this was centered around board work. And we will continue to bring this back to the board. But we also want you to know that as a board member, you bring an identity, you bring life experience, you bring different elements of your journey. It can be your spiritual journey, it can be your gender, it could be your race, it could be your age, it could be the communities you grew up in, and how you show up matters in regards to those different elements of your identity. So in other words, you have so many different intersections of your identity that matter and affect the way you see the world, or the way you may not necessarily see things that are affecting your ability to be effective in your work. So it's very important that we see ourselves. That's part of the process. So we begin with some basic acknowledgement work. We go from that into what we call the how, which is the levels of commitment that it will take to be able to make the change, the different strategies we got to put in place. And then you get into the what, and that's the transformative work that takes lots of time. Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to promise you that at the end of this initiative that you're going to have all the answers. What I am going to promise you is that we're going to spark some thoughts and challenge you and make you a little bit uncomfortable and push you into a different journey. You may have some eye-opening moments, but you will not have all the answers. In fact, if I do my job well, what I'm really pushing you to do is become more curious, right? And to put yourself in a position where you will allow yourself to ask more questions. One of the things that we've learned about culture, particularly here in America, and white supremacy culture as a whole, we'll talk about that as we go through our process, is that oftentimes it's rooted in the idea that we have to know everything. We have to have all the answers, and we have to be experts when we show up in a room. And I'm going to break that idea right now. Again, we're going against the status quo, and I'm going to challenge you to not be an expert. I'm going to challenge you to just be yourself. To remove the mask that we wear that say we have to know everything, and to allow for a degree of oops culture to exist within this group. Now, this is a large group. We're used to groups this size. You're going to break out into smaller groups, but as a whole, you're a large group. And it can be challenging sometimes to be in front of people you don't know and allow yourself to have an oops moment. But that's part of the journey, is that over the next few months that we work together, we're going to have these large group moments. We're going to have small group moments. But in that, we're asking for you to allow yourselves to just be human, to remove the layers of organizational identity that you carry, this idea that you're supposed to be perfect, all that idealism, throw it out, and allow yourselves to make mistakes, to say some things that are not perfect, to learn from those mistakes, and to be on this journey so we can grow together, right? So how TPS does that is we provide consulting and coaching and all that, but really the work here is to empower you with the skills you need to be able to carry on this work without us, right? We don't see ourselves as the end all be all. The way that we work in the way we've been effective is by educating and training and facilitating meaningful conversations. And we do most of our work in what is known as predominantly white spaces. Oftentimes when there are people of color that are in the room, we find that folks of color are like less engaged in some of this work. And the reason why is because there's an exhaustion and a fatigue that comes from having to constantly be a part of these conversations with white folk. And we appreciate that, and we recognize that there's value in having that level of diversity in the room, just to be able sometimes to hear things or to learn things that you otherwise may not know. We're trying to create spaces in which we can plant what we call seeds of knowledge and to really provoke, be provocative in bringing out new thoughts and new feelings. We want people to specialize in listening and learning, taking in new information, and challenging yourself to hear something that maybe you're not so comfortable with. We also center the lives of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We center those lives and experiences in everything that we do at TPS. That's part of our root work. We recognize that the experiences of those who've been marginalized, folks have been harmed enough. And to acknowledge systemic racism is to not only acknowledge racist, but is to acknowledge the victims of racism. Systemically, personally, institutionally, they are victims in this. There is harm caused by racism, even from those of us who are not intentionally trying to participate in a racist society. So a big part of this work is lifting the voices, the experiences, the unique experience that folks of color have in these spaces. Ultimately, what we want to do is create trust, though. We want racial intergroup dialogue that's rooted in something called relational cultural theory, which is a simple assertion that we don't get to grow unless there's some level of conflict in our relationships. Our relationships should challenge us. Relationships, you'll hear that word a lot throughout the course of the time that we're together. We'll talk a lot about relationships, how important it is to build relationships, how getting out and building trust and loyalty is rooted in relationships, how recruitment is rooted in relationships, how her retention is rooted in relationships, how belonging and trust, and yes, even love is rooted in relationships. And so the strategy that you build in order to advance racial equity and to build diverse networks and to build diverse boards is rooted heavily in relationships. And so internally, the question you're asking yourself or should be asking yourself in this moment is, do I have relationships with people other than like that don't look like me, that don't come from my community, that don't think the way I think, that don't act the way I act? How often do I get outside of my network, my comfort zone, to meet people, to engage people, to learn from people that are different from me? Because ultimately, the answers to those questions are going to determine how effective you are in being able to move the needle. And when we talk about that needle, we're talking about towards advancing racial equity in the systems that you're a part of. In addition to this, when you say, okay, well, I may not have those relationships, the question is why? What are the biases that we carry internally? What are the judgments that we're holding within us that prevent us from being able to really engage in a meaningful way? What are the thoughts that go through our minds when we think about people of different genders and different races, okay? People of different socioeconomic statuses. When you hear words like poverty, and you hear words like immigration or immigrant, or you hear Black people, what goes through your mind initially? And so, and I'm not asking you to share that out in this moment, but part of this work is being introspective enough to acknowledge that some of those identities make us uncomfortable. The other piece of it is that the acknowledgement of how uncomfortable we are is an important part of being able to heal from that discomfort. We've got to be able to talk about why we fear each other. What is the fear rooted in? For a lot of folks, we know that racial anxiety, which is the fear of dealing with racial issues, is rooted in, for white folk, the fear of being looked at as racist, of having the label of racist placed on you. For folks of color, it's being stereotyped or being in any way looked at as being, someone who fits the mold of what bad Black people do or bad Hispanic people do or bad Latinx folks. I mean, we have so many different judgments that we've put out here on folks. And that racial anxiety plays a role in how we engage each other as a result. So again, going internal, learning why we think the way we think, why we approach things the way we approach them, and frankly, why our behaviors, the way we show up, are a reflection of those deeper internal thoughts and feelings. All of this is rooted in something that we know as critical race theory, which until the last year was not very controversial, and it became pretty controversial. But critical race theory, for those of you who have never heard this term before, is really the idea that racism is endemic. It's rooted in every facet of our society. It's literally everywhere. It's embedded in and woven into the very fabric of who we are as people in this country, as citizens, as folks that are part of the society. Racism is everywhere. And so because it's been normalized and it's been so woven into our daily lives, we oftentimes can't even see it. And that's for folks who are both on the side of participating in upholding racist structures, as well as those who've been oppressed by racism. That racism is a means to an end. That racism is something that's used to maintain power of majority groups over minority groups. And that at the root of all of this, power is a key part of this discussion. Because what we found, even in our work, is that oftentimes when we talk about anti-racism, people are willing to throw money, they're willing to throw time, they're willing to throw a lot of values around anti-racism. But when it comes to actually being willing to say, I'm giving up power, that's a different conversation. The question of whether or not, if you're on a board and you recognize that the board is predominantly white and you're a white person on that board, the question is, would you be willing, and I'm not asking you to answer this right now, but would you be willing to give up your place on the board to allow a person of color from the communities that you represent to take that slot? And that's a wow question. Like, well, what do you mean? I mean, I bring value. I know I bring things to the board. What is this person's qualifications? Is it just because they're a person of color? I know it gets real detailed, and I'm not suggesting that you should know all the answers right now, but the reality is that the power discussion, as nuanced as it is still a discussion that has to happen at some point. You can't just have equity without talking about ceding power, letting go of something. Not just sharing power, but also ceding it. So sometimes the discussion about equity becomes uncomfortable when we begin to acknowledge that the solution to inequity is partly relying upon people letting go of power. Now, there are some who argue that folks will never let go of power, that power is so close to us that who would ever voluntarily let go of it? Hence the reason why people feel like sometimes you have to take power. But those are the questions that we have to grapple with as we deal with advancing toward racial equity, is what are we willing to do in order to achieve our values? If our value is rooted in racial equity, if our value is rooted in diversity, if our value is rooted in inclusion, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to sacrifice in order to reach those goals, right? We also know that part of critical race theory is that we oftentimes don't even recognize the depth of racism. So when it's brought to the surface, it's oftentimes, for those who have not experienced it or don't understand it, it is a shock. It's literally a shock when it's brought to the surface. And for those who've been experiencing it and know it all too well, the reaction is often, how could you be surprised by this? It's been in your face all this time. Within the last year and the incidents that happened with, the lead up, if you will, which has been hundreds of years of lead up of poor relations between the justice system, police specifically in the Black community, we saw this culminate in this murder in broad daylight of George Floyd. And a lot of people who saw that video were disheartened, they were disgusted, and they said, you know what? I didn't realize how bad this was. And I remember in the weeks following George Floyd, how many folks I was in front of, white folks in tears, talking about I had no idea. And you know what I saw from people of color? Exhaustion, fatigue, and anger. How could you not see this? Those are the dynamics that we live in. And what I tell people is that there is a way that you cannot see something and still be living in it. It's like asking a fish, is water wet? Sometimes when you're in it, you have no idea you're in it. But once you're made aware that you're in it, you're now accountable for it. Watch this. The idea is that everyone has a level of what we call unconscious incompetence, which means you don't know what you don't know. But once you're made aware of it, once you're consciously competent and you're aware of it, you have the skills, you get it, you have no way to say, I don't know anymore. So once you become awakened, once you start to see this stuff, you can't turn your eye to it anymore. That's the work that we have as a society. So that's how we combat something that shows up endemically, something that shows up in a way that appears to be invisible, like racism. There are elements of it that are obvious, like seeing someone put their knee in someone's neck in broad daylight while they're screaming for their life. And then there are elements of it that are not so obvious, like what we've seen over the last year with the way COVID has really uncovered the way racial disparities exist. In fact, even the vaccines, right? I just saw a report this morning that said white Americans are being vaccinated at a much higher level than people of color, than Black people specifically in this country, right? And there's a whole lot of why behind that. But again, it exposes the disparities. This is what racism does. Racism hides. It says it gives you justifications and reasons why it exists. And oftentimes those reasons are not very justifiable, but we've lived with them. And so the work of being able to do this work, and again, this is why we say it's paced, is not to just get to the Jamal, tell me what to do. I'm not a wizard. This is a 400-year problem. We're in this together. The what comes after we figure out the why and the how. Okay? So today's session, as we pace our way through today, we're going to look at some common language and we're going to look at some key terms and we're going to get to know some of these things. We're going to talk about nonprofit diversity. We're going to talk about this project and what it entails, but we're also going to challenge ourselves again to remove and strip our organizational identities to really be in this moment, to talk openly and honestly about the challenges that we face as we engage in this work. And I want you to know that the thinking behind the cohort model was that we wanted groups to be able to see that other groups were faced with the same problem. So one of the things about racism is it tends to make you feel like you're by yourself in things, right? It's like, no, a lot of folks are facing this issue. The data supports it, but every one of these cohort models supports it. And what we hope is that as you listen to other groups and their experiences, that you'll learn something that you can bring back to your group. And that's happened in previous cohorts that we've worked with, okay? So what can you expect from this particular project? Well, for one, there are some key things that we want to focus on, which we call needs, right? The organizations that are participating in this initiative need to determine the gaps and opportunities pertaining to inequity on your board. So what are the areas, what are the holes? What are the areas where there can be opportunities for growth, right? Every organization that's involved in this also needs to adopt a change framework, not just a, hey, let's go out and just put a sign out and say we just want some people of color or ask folks of color if they know anyone. We're talking about adopting a full-scale racial equity change framework that will get you to your, ultimately what you want is the impact of that to lead to more diversity, right? But you've got to be very strategic in your approach. Racism is strategic. Anti-racism has to be strategic, right? So in order to be able to advance this work in a meaningful way, strategy is important. It's not the only thing you need, but it is an important part of the puzzle. Planning is also important. So what we hope that you come out of this with is a plan, right? It's something that allows you to be able to lean on, to say we have some direction, some framing for advancing racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, not only at the board level, but this should trickle down to the organization. As an equity core team, you represent in some ways a cross-section of folks from different parts of the organization. Many of you on boards, many of you are in executive leadership, some of you are from staff as well. And your input in this process is really critical. The feedback you give each other is really critical. You're not graded by us. We're not here to grade you. We're not gonna mark your papers. We're not gonna give you the answers. We're gonna give you frameworks. We're gonna give you ideas. We're gonna coach you. We're gonna push you. But here's what, I believe, truly believe, and I don't think I could do this work if I didn't, but I truly believe that everyone in this space that's in this room right now is creative, resourceful, and whole. I truly believe that. I truly believe that you have more answers than I do. I believe that my role is to shine light on ways of thinking and for you to push yourselves to fill in the answers. So yeah, I have ideas and I'll give you the different ideas that I have, but really I'm looking for you to take that and maximize it. Because the success of this initiative is not based on how much I show you, it's how much you show yourselves. What you're able to do, how you're able to engage your community, that's on you. My goal is to inspire you to act. Okay? Let's keep going. So in order to inspire you to act, and again, in a paced model, we're going to start with the concept of why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? And I don't mean a superficial why. I mean really thinking to yourself right now, what is my role? Why am I here? How does this fit? How does this align with my purpose in life? And we'll explain more about that in a moment. So I'll share this video with you briefly and we'll come back.
So the series is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know? The next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, you know, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
All right, so let's just start there.
So the series is...
This is what I mean by sort of like pacing ourselves and starting from the core is let's just begin with looking at this concept of why. You know, here we see in this video that once the gentleman was asked to sing the song, he sang it real plain. There was almost like no soul in it. it was just flat. Once he knew why he was singing it, changed his complete approach to it. He just opened up. He brought passion. He brought connection. He brought power to it. And the result of that, if you notice, was everyone else got excited. Everyone else got into the moment. So what can be learned from that video? What can be learned about the power of why? So I just want to open that up for a moment. If anyone wants to take a shot at jumping in, when we think about the power of knowing your why, based on what we just saw, what can be learned from that video?
I can share. Hi. So I think that when you know your why, it's really about yourself and not what you have been told by others or taught by society. And so when you know your why, this authenticity comes through, and people are more willing to listen to what you have to say, because it's not the same old story being repeated.
Sure. So you said a key word there, which was authenticity. I just want to make sure that we hold on to that word for a minute, because I mentioned earlier that one of the words that we would hear a lot is relationships, but relationships and authenticity go hand in hand, particularly with this kind of work. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else, reflections on why?
I think that your why enables you to tap into your passion and your connection to your what.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. There are a lot of steps, in doing this work for a number of years, and many of you who have been participating in racial and social justice work know there's a lot of activity, right? There's things that we can tell people about challenging their privilege and confronting systemic racism and engaging in collective healing and all these different things. But doing all the what matters not if you don't know why. If you don't show up authentically, if you don't show up with a real sense of purpose, and if you don't have a rooted sense of what your beliefs are, and there's an alignment between your personal beliefs and this work, it's not going to happen in an authentic way, which is going to water down the value of what you're doing. No matter how good you think you're doing it, it's not going to be impactful. Again, pacing ourselves. Anyone else have any thoughts on the why?
Yeah, I do. I think your why also, through the good, the bad, and the ugly, through setbacks, you still move forward with passion and energy, because you know what the why is, and that's your ultimate goal. So you have to fight through all the difficulties and naysayers and all that goes along with that.
Absolutely, Michael. Absolutely. Folks who have a why are inspired to endure inconvenience, right? To go through personal suffering, right? Not because they have to, but because they want to. And so when people
I was going to say determination. Yeah, determination. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Determination is a big part of this. But determination, like, think about how easy it is to be swayed from something that you really don't want to do, right? But someone's trying to get you to do it. They're trying to force you into it, right? So this is why it's important. We say, okay, like the equity core teams, the people who are involved in this is not just a matter of title. This is not just a matter of what's convenient. We're thinking in terms of, are you truly connected, and are you willing to do whatever it takes? Are you willing to get told no, to go through a variety of uncomfortable moments, to have people challenge your belief system, to be embarrassed at sometimes because you may say things or do things wrong? Are you willing to go through those difficulties? Are you willing to embarrass yourselves publicly in order to get to the greater good? So one of the things we find is that folks sometimes try to keep a face. It's like, well, we just want to say and do all the right things. What if I told you that there's just no saying and doing all the right things, that you have to fail in order to get better? You have to do this wrong. You have to mess up. You have to get checked. You have to put yourself in a position to have someone tell you that, no, this didn't work, in order to get better at it. And there's a level of personal suffering that comes with that, right? That's intimidating. That's tough. We hear a lot of times, you know, well, we don't know how to have conversations about race. I'm like, it's not the how that you have to worry about, it's the why you want to have conversations about race. Get to the root of it first. Why do you want to have these conversations? Why does this matter to you? The how is not really as complicated as you think sometimes, but we hesitate to do the how and the what because our why is not sharp enough. We haven't figured that part out yet. Why is not just some soft thing, it's a part of your strategy. Your individual as well as your collective why is a part of your strategy. So with racial equity work, there's 3 elements to this. There's the why, the how, and then what. And what we find more often than not is that people want to do the what, they want to do the how, but they don't want to talk about the why. The why, the reason why it's challenging sometimes to talk about the why is because the why exists in a different part of our brains that struggles to communicate what we feel. You know, you ask somebody like, why do you love me? Right? Like, why do you want to do this work? Like sometimes it can be really challenging to get to the heartbeat of it and really articulate why this matters to you. But that's the challenge. The challenge is to be able to find those words, to find that connection, to find your spirit and talk through it, right? So why is rooted in your belief, right? Your belief. So here's what I want you to know, and I want you to really process this, right? If as a leader of an organization, you're unable to articulate why you want to engage in this work, then the rest of your workforce and other key stakeholders are not going to know why they should engage in this work. So at the board level and at the leadership level, you have a unique responsibility to establish the why for that reason. You've got to establish the belief system. There's lots of data that already shows that when leaders don't know how to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, race, that the people in their organization don't really know how to talk about it either. You've got to set the tone. So this is why we start the work in many ways on our end. We start with so many organizational leaders. There are people who start with folks, you know, activism, and they bring things up from the bottom. We work with the people who are already in the positions of influence and power. We go, but hold up, you got to be held accountable, because if you don't feel comfortable and don't talk openly and don't challenge yourselves, then how do you expect everyone else to do it? So this is part of the work, right? Is that if the leader cannot tell you why they want to engage in this work in a meaningful way, then how can you get others to do it? And frankly, if you can't say why, how are you going to inspire other people to act, right? How do you establish partnerships in the community when you can't articulate why you want them to be your partners? You want to do better, more equitable community engagement, but you don't know how to say it. You don't know what you really want. You want to do better recruitment, and you want to bring in folks of diverse backgrounds, and particularly people of color, to come into your organization, but you don't know why you want to do it. Or your why is something that's really superficial. Well, it's just the times we're in right now. It's the right thing to do. Why? Why is it the right thing to do? Get to the root, right? So the why is about your belief, right? The how is a different thing. The how is the actions that support the belief. So from an orderly standpoint, you've got to start with the how with the why before you get to the how. Writing a plan that has actions in it is meaningless if you don't know what your belief system is. And so the groups that go through this process with us, we begin here with really getting them to the root cause. Like, what do you want to do? What do you believe? What are your values? Right? And then from there, we talk about how do you fulfill those values, right? And your values can't just be words on paper that have no meaning. They've got to be verbs, right? So people say, like, we value equity. We value inclusion. I'm like, what does that mean? A how is when you take a value and you turn it into a verb. It's not we value inclusion. We're deliberately inclusive of specific individuals for this particular reason. As you develop your plans with us, we're going to challenge you to do that, to think about who's not at the table and to call it out. If you're doing this initiative because you want to improve the diversity of your board, What are you trying to improve? Who do you need at the table? Why do you need them at the table? And why should they join? This one size fits all, we just want to have an inclusive atmosphere where everyone can fit. That's great, but we know that the research says that people will not be inspired to engage you unless they feel like they are specifically identified and called to be a part of your initiative. So you need to call out who you're missing. There's power in that. There's authenticity in that. The discomfort of it is that every time you call out who you're missing, you start to feel like, well, what about everyone else? You can't, this is really tricky because you can't do everything at one time, and you don't necessarily want to omit certain groups, but you do need to make it a point to highlight the folks, particularly people who have been marginalized, been disenfranchised, who've been out of those lanes of power and privilege. To invite them into this work is very, very, very important. So being deliberately inclusive matters, right? Being deliberate and being actionable in every one of your values matters. And then you get to the what. And the what is the result of the how. It's the result of the how, is what comes out of that, right? So in this particular case, I just want to highlight something. You know, producing a product or service at high quality is not enough. You need to have that word that came out, which is authenticity. The authenticity comes with the clarity of the why. When you know your why and you understand your belief system, then when you begin to act on the why, your authenticity comes through. People see that, they feel that, they understand that it's real. I've been asked to be on a lot of boards, but I knew in many cases that they were asking me to be on the board because I was Black and that I do equity work. And it made them feel that they were going to have someone who could be an expert in the room on that particular topic. And that's wonderful. But when I asked, what do I bring to the table? I couldn't get much more than, well, we just really would value your perspective. On what? I'm not rich. I don't have no money, right? So what you want? What would you value my perspective on? When you're authentic, that's when you get results. Tell me what your why is. Your authenticity matters. It produces relationships. Relationships build trust. With trust comes loyalty. Authenticity is when you say things and you do things that you actually believe, right? So we're in this world where it's really hard sometimes to come across authenticity, authentic relationships, authentic people. But I'm challenging you to really think about whether or not your engagement in this work is authentic. So we know that if you don't know why, you can't know how, right? That if you don't know why, you can't know how, and that the why leads to an authentic how and a meaningful and sustainable what. So this process, which is just that, process, it's paced, it's introspective, it's deep, it's slow. There's no rush job. You're not going to get all your answers overnight. And it involves you going deep. And I'll help you where I can along that work, okay? So here's what we're going to do for the next 15 minutes. I want you to spend some time in your breakout groups. And I want you to have a discussion amongst your group about your personal as well as your collective why. So each person should have a chance to sort of share their personal, as well as you're going to begin to draft a collective why statement for your group. What's your why for engaging in this work? One person in the group is responsible for drafting the statement that's going to reflect and represent the group's work. It does not need to be finished. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not wordsmithing. We're trying to get the spirit of what you want to say out. And you're going to put something out, and then we're going to have someone who's going to be prepared to share that why statement on behalf of the group. So you're going to come back at the end of that time, and you'll have a chance to report out. So one person who's drafting, one person who's going to share, everyone in the group should be in the discussion talking about not only your personal but also your collective why for engaging in meaningful racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work for your organization that you're representing right now in this initiative, okay? So at this point, I'm gonna have Elizabeth, she has the breakout groups already set up. We'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Make good use of your time, and we'll see you and hear more about how you've progressed when we come back. Some of you.
It's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start, right? So what we hope in having these types of breakouts, that this will serve as a catalyst for you to have more meaningful discussions offline. We, you know, and every time we do these workshops, we always like, we want more time. And we're like, we'd love to give you more time, but then we'd have no workshop. So it's like, we have to kind of find that balance, right? But what we hope is that you will use this as a starting point for more meaningful discussions to come out. So what we've asked is that you would have spent this last 15, almost 20 minutes really discussing your personal as well as your collective why. And I'd like to hear from the person that you selected to represent your group to just kind of share whatever draft statement that you started to develop linked to the collective why for why you're engaging this racial equity work. So we'll start, I'm just gonna call on, we'll start with FCA and let FCA take the lead. Again, just sharing your collective why statement that you've come to. Who's the rep for FCA?
Rob, I'll start, and Mary Ellen, I know you took notes. I will tell you, we were very much engaged in the conversation, which I think, as you said, Jamal, needs to continue. I don't know about the other groups. We did not get to that. I think we are still much engaged in that conversation. And Mary Ellen, you can share any thoughts you had since you were our note taker. But I guess you'd say we did not follow the assignment necessarily because we're frankly not ready to come up with that specific why statement.
It's okay, we're pacing. So the idea was that you start to gather your thoughts, and that's what we refer to it as a draft. This is not an exam, it's not a gotcha moment. So if in your authentic conversation, you didn't get to a place of actually writing anything yet, you're not punished. There's no bad you. This is an authentic part of your journey. We will ask for, by the time we get to our next session, for everyone to have that draft ready, but you have weeks between now and the next session. So I appreciate that, Rob. Thank you for your honesty. I'd love to hear from Mary Ellen about some of your takeaways from the discussion.
Well, I just offered to start scribbling as people were sharing. And I have to say that I agree with Rob that there was, I think, the beginning of some honest conversations. Unfortunately, everyone didn't have time to go. So honestly, just a little feedback, it might be better to have a little longer breakout session. But there were thoughts about changing how we view the value of our participation on the board. There were thoughts about having a deeper understanding of the community that we serve and have that be reflective, a concept of looking in the mirror ourselves, and this being an exercise to do that. A conversation that began about being clear about your giving on the board can be certainly expertise and should be expertise and time and what you bring as a person, as a diverse person to the board, not necessarily just giving, and how we make people feel included. There was also the beginnings, though, of conversation about how you balance that with the fact that some of our biggest givers are people on the board. So those were just kind of some of the salient points, but we had probably about 11 or 12 people, and only about 7 people had the opportunity to speak because people were being respectful and kind of going one at a time.
Sure. And I would encourage you again to, between now and the next session, carve out some time if you can as a group to come back together while you have some momentum, continue the discussion, let it continue to unfold. But thank you for sharing that, Mary Ellen, I appreciate it. Let's go to Building One Community. Who's the representative for that? Mary?
I am. And we didn't have a conclusive statement, but what we decided to share were basically the 5 points or themes that came out of everybody's individual input. And the first thing that came out, and as we were probing our why, was both experiences of conscious and unconscious racism in either growing up in the South, living in other countries, or in different experiences in our lives. And that kind of provided a framework for us to then move on to recognizing that in each of these cases, what came out was that it was a demonstration of power, and that the racism that we experience in our own communities is not unique to here or United States. Several people had experiences in other countries, but how it's played out is uniquely American, especially for the Black. And we recognize, because of the unique mission of building one community, our awareness of how it plays out for Brown and our Muslim brothers and sisters as well, in terms of this idea of racial identity. We then circled back to looking at all of this, and one of the members of the group recognized that we're all on a person to make things better, to eliminate the systems of racism that we have to recognize that we all participate in. Sorry, now I'm muted.
All right, so eliminating the systems of racism that you're all participating in. Thank you for sharing that. We appreciate that, Mary. And again, I want you all to recognize that the statement is not as important as your process. So the fact that you're having these discussions is important. I'm listening for how quickly you move from the why to the how and the what. Because what happens sometimes is that folks will be like, yeah, this is great and everything. Let's talk about what the problems are, and let's talk about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And we're like, no, come back, keep the conversation grounded and rooted in the why. What I'm interested in knowing is why. You got people around the table. Everyone is supposed to be there. You can't inspire action if you don't have a clear sense of your why. So as you're sharing out, even if you don't have a collective statement, I'd like to hear more about the why conversation. What's that rooted in? Okay. Let's go to all our kin next. I see Jessica shaking her head. I want to bring her in, or anyone from her group that's the rep, to talk about your process, and also if you were able to come to some type of a statement at this point.
Sure. I'll say a few words, and I invite everyone else who is in the conversation to chime in. First, let me say this was a profound and new conversation that I think we were all so moved and excited by. Each of us had a why that was deeply personal, that was rooted in our childhood, in our family experience, our professional experience. We sort of got to each person's, well, not even everyone's, but some of the group's 3-minute experience of that. We did not get to a collective why. What we came to was a hunger for the 20-minute version of that, and a commitment to come back together as a group to truly dive in on that, and to bring that, in fact, to our whole board, to have that conversation, for each person to have that reflection. But we did make a commitment to come back. So if you can wait until the next session, I think we'd be excited to return with a collective why then.
Yep.
And I invite anyone else to share as well.
I love it. Thank you, Jessica. Anyone else from all our kin? Yeah. All right. Let's go to our friends over at Domus next.
Hi, everybody. I think what we found is that our personal lives were pretty connected. We felt that as human beings, we'd witness these brutal inequalities that exist with disconnected and disengaged young people, and not only in education, but just also socioeconomically, not having access to resources. I think that each of us felt a personal conviction in being obligated to help people that haven't been able to have access to things that they really should as basic rights, and having what you should as a human. And then our larger why, we talked a little bit about, although that we serve these populations, although that out into this community, and we try to lift people up, specifically people of color who have been marginalized, that in and of itself is not strategically anti-racist. Rather, we want to be able to invite people into our agency and sit on the board and sit around the leadership table and invite people who represent the color of our community into our agency, so that way decisions that we're making and the policies that we're creating as an agency not only serve the people that we work with, but then also really commit to us becoming the anti-racist agency.
Yeah, no, I love that. One of the things you said that it really stuck with me was this idea of being strategically anti-racist. Do folks understand what that means, or have we do we have a collective understanding of what we mean when we say strategically anti-racist? Because it feels like there's a lot of anti-racism in value, but we don't always know what that means to turn it into strategy. But just by a show of hands or something, do we generally know what that means? Strategically anti-racist? Ashley, there's some folks that didn't raise their hand. I'd be curious if you could just maybe expand a little bit upon your thinking around this idea of being strategically anti-racist.
Yeah, I mean, I could take a stab at it. I'm not an academic in this area at all, but I think the idea is that when you talk about instituting anti-racism in your organization, it's not just putting up posters of people of different colors holding hands and kind of creating these visuals around what we want to have happen. Rather, it's making organizational decisions to include people of color, so that way the decisions are demonstrative and reflective of what people of color need. I think that sometimes when a person who identifies as white, who might be a leader in an organization, obviously they're going to want to do the best by the people they serve. They want to inherently make great decisions, but they're not a person of color and they don't know what it's like to walk in our shoes. So it's important to have that person sitting at the table to communicate what those needs are, because they can be wildly different than what we would imagine they would need to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great sort of synopsis. Anyone else have any other thoughts around this idea of being strategically, deliberately, intentionally anti-racist? Because she really gave a really good response, but I'm just curious if anyone has anything they want to add. Yeah, it's I think that's the work right now for a lot of organizations. Actually, is that we got to move beyond just the concept of anti-racism, and it's a lot of people thinking that it's just this it's an idea, right? But it actually has a set of actions associated with it. And you've got to really be willing to adopt it. And that's very tough to do. But hopefully folks understand that this is part of why we're in this work, is that we're trying to put strategy in play. Let's turn to our friends over at Person to Person. Who's representing for that group? Nancy, is it you or you have someone else in the group?
Yeah, no, it's me. So I would say that we came away with two real themes. One was sort of our professional work and our professional lives, and the idea that we are doing a disservice to those we're serving if we are not fully understanding and appreciating the resiliency, the joy, the qualities, the understanding of who they are as people, and that without doing this work, we really can't move from a transactional interaction to a relational interaction, and sort of wanting to really appreciate the full person in our work lives, in our volunteerism, and our commitment to the people that we're serving. We talked about combating narratives, overcoming stereotypes, for lack of a better word, and preconceived notions of people who come to us for help and the reasons why they come to us for help, and really seeing people as more of a full person. And then the other theme I would say on a sort of a more personal level is the idea that systemic racism, the systems that are in place and the power structures that have really prevented people from fully participating in society, and it limits all of us, and we all gain from removing those kinds of barriers that keep people from meeting their full potential and sharing their full potential with everybody. And so this, this sense that smart, bright, resilient people have not been able to achieve greatness through systems that have held them back, damages all of us. And so, it's in everybody's, we all really want to remove those barriers so that we can all participate fully in our everyday lives.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. That's powerful. Let me ask you a challenging question, Nancy. What benefit would it be for white people who are in positions of power and privilege to give up their power and privilege in order to create a more equitable society? I mean, you mentioned that we're all sort of better off, but just kind of to push that point a bit, how are white people going to be better off in a more racially equitable society?
Well, to kind of go back to the, you don't know what you don't know. If we are through systems depriving our entire society and culture of the values and talents of people, we don't have the benefit of what they bring to the table. We don't know the people that would have been achieving great things and been scientists and solving mysteries and inventing things if we as a society are holding them back. So there's a tremendous amount that we are missing out on by having systems in place that limit people's ability to achieve. And this is not part of what we talked about in our group, but I live in Darien, Connecticut, and I see what my children lack by living in a very homogenous community. So there's so much, there's tangible and there's intangible, and I do think part of the challenge is articulating it for white people who might not appreciate it. I think that is a challenge. But those are just two examples, I would say.
No, that's powerful. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to lean in with any thoughts around this idea of white people, their power, their privilege, and what the benefit would be of giving that up?
I think there's a perception among many white people, and it certainly fuels the white supremacy movement, that if blacks achieve, if the world becomes fair and blacks achieve equity, that there is going to be a big loss in the white community. And I think that is an idea that is there in the white community, that my children might not get into university because more black children are going to take those places. I might not get the promotion because black people or brown people, however you want to frame it, are going to get the jobs that I might otherwise have gotten. So I think there is a fear in the white community that there would be a loss. And I think that's part of the fear that has fueled the suppression that we've had all these years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's powerful. And how do you, and this is for you, Mary, but for others, how do you address that? So when you know that fear exists, even if it's not necessarily being stated out loud, but you're in rooms and boardrooms and other places where folks might be holding on to that fear, how do you address it?
Well, I don't think that the richness.
I was with over the weekend with a potentially white donor who said to me, "Well, listen, everybody knows it's all about hard work, and if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps." And I had read this quote a while ago, and I said, "Yeah, that's absolutely true. But our brown and black people don't have the boots to pull up, so you have to start from there and then say pull up your bootstraps. So how does that work?" And he just stared at me, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's where we're coming from, and everybody would be better off if we all started with boots."
It's powerful.
Jamal, this is Mike Hyman. You mentioned earlier about the idea that people think about what certain words engender or mean to them, such as when you say black people or blacks or immigrants or whatever, what conjures up in your mind? And Mary's point about the idea that folks see this as a losing game, that if they were to allow others to participate. And with our group, I mentioned the fact that, 55, 60 years ago, America kept women out of the marketplace. And it was a very patriarchal society that said, hey, look, if they come in, and arrogantly so, they're going to be taking some of the slots for executives around the country in businesses and what have you. And it's been a slow and steady rise, but it had to happen. There's a moral piece of this that says this is the right thing to do. And I would think that corporate America is better off because of all of the brain power. Hospitals and medical schools are better off because of all of the brain power that has been brought to the table by women. That is certainly true also for African Americans and people of color. That being locked out means that we don't drive our engines for this nation as hard and as fast as they need to be. That competitiveness is important. And I think we all thrive better when that happens. That's just a value point for me, sorry.
No, that's powerful. Thank you. Thank you. I want to give our friends at Family Centers a chance to weigh in with their thoughts around the why, the collective why.
So we were enthralled in this conversation and it was the beginning of a very rich conversation. We did not get to the point of selecting someone to represent us. So before I go off blathering about our discussion, I would like to step back for a second and let anyone from our group make a comment. It doesn't have to be the collective why. We can get to that in a minute, but about the conversation. If any of the board members would like to just make a comment about our discussion, that would be great.
I think part of our discussion, we started off thinking about why we were engaged with family centers, because we saw that as part of the why. And that took us to thinking about the Family Center's mission statement, which is to empower families and individuals to reach to attain their potential. And so that led us to talking about more internally what we could do to reflect the community and we want to serve our community in the best way we possibly can and provide the best services. And how can we actually find out from the community what that is? So we got off in that discussion about internally what we can do to listen to the community to better serve them. So Bob, back to you after that.
Or anyone else who wants to comment before I go on.
Well, Bob, we did identify our the governance level of our organization as needing work. And I think that's kind of when the session ended, but we did give some time on that as the area that we should focus on for change.
Jamal, we did also speak about, frankly, a little bit contradicting you in terms of white individuals stepping down or being willing to step down. And I think that's probably more of a philosophical question than an action one. I mean, I have to ask myself, being on the board of Family Centers, what does that do for my resume, or what does that do for my position in the community, et cetera? So I think it's a little bit more of a philosophical question and a very important one. But I think that the really important piece of that is that we discussed enlarging the tent and how do we enlarge the tent. And again, it's only the beginning of the discussion. Thank you.
That's powerful, Carl. Thank you.
Anyone else?
The only other thing that I would just add to what everybody has so eloquently already stated, and I'm bringing it back to the mission and the why, we're engaged in this work. Obviously, we're a mission-based organization with a deep belief in creating pathways for equity so that people in our community can realize their potential. So I just wanted to kind of add in that aspect, that there is a belief that is rooted in our mission statement. Just by virtue of the organization that we are, there is a inherent need for us to examine ways to create those pathways and to be a more robust and forward-thinking organization that best meets the needs of our community. So to me, that's a big part of the why.
Thank you, Bill.
So Jamal, I did want to echo Carl's comment, because the whole issue of power sharing, power shifts, we talked about the way that it would work if, instead of, I think Carl mentioned a bigger tent, instead of just turning over positions on the board, if we expanded it and created a situation that better reflected, if you will, our community, where people are getting to know each other from different stations of life, different backgrounds, and working together, and all being heard at the same table. And I think that also, in some ways, addresses that fear that some people have, that if some people advance, other people have to recede. And, you know, maybe there's a way that people can advance and retain some input while other people are gaining more input. And that the combination of people's working together is what we're really striving for.
Sure. No, I think that's great. And so I'm not necessarily pushing back on that idea. What I am saying, though, is that at the core of this, we're talking about the idea, and I think Carl mentioned this, you know, sort of philosophical, is like, what are we willing to let go of? How much suffering are we willing to go through individually and collectively to be able to achieve our equity goal? And so to your point, you could say, well, you know, let's expand the tent. Let's open up more opportunities for folks to come to the table. This way, no one has to let go of anything and we all can work together. And that's an idealistic sort of perspective to have. That's one avenue. Another avenue could very well be, we may not be able to make the tent any bigger. But what we need to do is come to grips with the fact that this tent is homogenous. And so in correcting what's been wrong and atoning for some of the atrocity that's led to this homogenous sort of tent, maybe we need to make some room. We need to have some people step down so that we can bring some other folks on. Again, to Carl's point, it's philosophical, but I think there's value in being able to have that conversation in a meaningful way, right? It's a very nuanced issue. I work with boards that have made that decision, though, that have literally released board members that have said, you know, we have folks step down so that we can create space, that we can't just make the tent bigger. We have to look at the fact that we have to atone for some of the things that we've done wrong, and that we've never been deliberate and strategic and intentional about anti-racism. And now that we are, we're going to force this change. And then others that have said, well, we just kind of want to, you know, we want everyone to work together. So maybe we just make it a little bigger. We can invite more people in, and that's more of a safe route to go. In some cases that works. In some cases, you know, you might find that you open up the tent and you have more of the same coming in. And so it doesn't really resolve your bigger problem. So there's a lot of room for you all to think. I'm not here to tell you which way to go, but I do appreciate the fact that you're thinking about it in such a nuanced way. I just want to stress to you, though, that this is why the why work is so important, is because there is a level of suffering that has to happen. Whether it's for your individual resume, your personal endeavors, your connection to community, whatever it has to be, in order to be able to move the needle, we've got to embrace the fact that there's got to be some level of suffering. And frankly, for folks who have been marginalized and oppressed in this country, that suffering has been a given. So the idea that those who are in power and privilege have to suffer somewhat in order to make room for other folks who have been suffering to have space at the table should not be that much of a controversial issue. But it is, to the extent that it's hard to sell people on the idea of letting go of something in order to let other folks in. So that's
can I just ask a question?
Sure.
So I understand what you're saying, and there's a big part of me that I'm on that train with you. But then there's this part of me that says, well, hold on, wait a minute. If we want to promote equity, we need to be able to work together.
Sure.
People of all colors, whites, blacks, brown,
absolutely,
indigenous folks, we all need to work together. And how do we learn to work together unless we are all working together on these leadership boards? When women came into the workforce, we didn't come in and push men out. We came in and worked hard with men so that we could prove our worth and that we could get up there and get into these positions of leadership, working with everybody. Why do we still have to keep saying we have to suffer, we're going to pull white people off? That is the only way that we're ever going to make this work. To me, that says we're never going to learn to work together unless we are working together.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Let's see if anyone has any views on it. I don't want to make this
Jamal?
a debate between
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I guess I would point back to a situation where in this country made some decisions about affirmative action during the 1960s into the 70s. And one of the things that occurred was with medical schools and law school admissions. There were a number of suits that were filed by applicants, white applicants, who said that my rights have been taken away because you've allowed a Black student to enter ahead of me. And so what we found is that during those years, that the number of medical seats available in medical schools and the number of law school seats expanded wildly during that time. They had increased the size of the tent so that instead of there being 100 seats available, there were now 125. And even with 125 being the example, there were lawsuits saying, from white individuals saying, you're giving away these seats to others. It is a fact. So it's that thing of how do you share, and people realizing that I may not get as much as I have been used to getting. And so I just raised that as a point. Yeah.
I think that you actually do get less. I mean, this is a hard conversation. I mean, half of all law school or medical school graduates are now women. So even if they expanded the tent some, you're right, you're still taking away slots. My daughter lived in South Africa for 9 years. And you know, what white people say is, I'm leaving because unless we're business people, our kids can't get into medical school or the, you know, University of Cape Town because you can only expand the slots so much. And when you want to create, you know, more diversity and give more people option, then there are fewer options. I find it interesting though, if you sort of center the conversation around what you have to give up, it sort of takes over the conversation and you don't get to, you know, attitudes, behavior, and where Jamal started with the why, it really does sort of, you know, and I think a lot of people in this country are just pure racist. I mean, there is this whole new movement. A lot of it is now about fear, but historically, you know, a lot of this is just based on horrendous racism and hate too. So you don't sort of get to that in a way when you get into what people should give up. I don't know, but it's true. You have to give up something.
The reality of it is that when you start looking at the history, though, that racism is rooted in the need for folks to have power. The history of racism is about power. It's about grabbing power. Racism was used as a justification for folks to gain power. So power is still at the core of the conversation, even if you don't want to deliberately, consciously have it. And even if you don't want to openly discuss the loss of power for some, for the gain of powers for others, it is there. Now, I'm not saying that you know, to Lisa's point, that your strategy needs to be to go out and say, hey, you know, white people, we're going to take all your power away so we can give, you know, folks of color some power here, right? I don't know if that's necessarily going to be your message, but what I am saying is that if you're going to do this work in a meaningful way, you cannot look past the power dynamics to say, oh, we just want everyone to just work together. Because we've had those conversations over a number of years, and guess what? For Black people in this country, that has not worked. we've opened up the tent. Even when we are at the table, the power is still not being shared the way it should be, even when we're at the leadership table, even when we're in the boardrooms. So this is not just about the optics of having more people of color in the room. This is about the acknowledgement of the fact that equity requires a real meaningful conversation about some people letting go so other people can have the power that should have been granted to them in the first place. And that's where you start getting into issues like atonement. If we want racial reconciliation in this country, you don't get to have reconciliation until you acknowledge the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that racism exists, and racism is a power issue. So if you're not willing to discuss it, then you're going to set yourself back in a huge way. Go ahead, Melissa.
So when you think of yourself as an anti-racist, you want to think of yourself as an agent of change, and change doesn't come from doing the same. We can't say we're going to do the same, but bring more people in. Change requires a new mindset, a new set of people, right? We can't say, oh, let's keep the same people, but we're changing, right? So yeah, we can change ourselves. We can work on ourselves to be more equitable people, but are we truly doing equity work if we're not even willing to give someone else the leadership role or the position? Does that make sense? And to Lisa's point about women coming in, women came in and tried to act like men, as opposed to the system changing to allow for women to exist as their authentic selves. So we came in, we're in the pantsuits. We came in acting, as opposed to having like relational leadership styles, we came in trying to be like men. And then we were then resented for it and called all sorts of other words. So change is necessary for this process to take place.
I also think it's tough when we generalize. I came of age in the 70s and I worked in an all male world, and I was a woman and I came with cookies. I didn't go to take over a man's job. I have 3 brothers. So we have to be very, very careful when we generalize.
Lean in. This conversation is supposed to be this heavy. This is good.
I was just gonna say, I got an MBA in 1969 at the Wharton School when I was one of 3 women students in the entire Wharton School, and being a woman in management in the early 70s was quite an experience. I could write a whole book on it, and there's no question that in the beginning, you did try to act like men and fit in, and eventually, basically women did find their own way and begin being their more authentic selves. But I think in the case of change, there is a period where everybody's uncomfortable. The men in this case were uncomfortable and the women were uncomfortable, and you have to find a way of working together, and that probably involves acknowledging the differences, which are actually great and work well. But it is uncomfortable, and you might as well admit that it's uncomfortable.
It's not only uncomfortable, but to your point about acknowledging the problem, the easiest thing to do is to ignore the problem and try to move back and go, so well, let's just all work together. Well, we got to start by looking at why we're not able to work together. This didn't just happen by accident. Racism didn't just happen. It was something that was intentional. It was formed. And this is, again, going into the history of this and looking at how systems have been intentionally designed to exclude and create barriers for specific groups to not participate in the mainstream. So this whole idea of like, let them in now if we expand the tent and everyone works together sounds great on the surface, but we know that that's not necessarily the way it works in this country. That's not the way it has worked. That's not the way it's working today. And if we're not willing to have that conversation, then it's going to be harder and harder for us. We may have inclusion in a sense, in an optical sense, but we're not going to have true equity. That's not going to happen. So this is where it gets really uncomfortable because, again, we all, we come into this conversation for different motives. We're like, well, we just want people to work together and get along and everything be great. But for folks who have had the experience of being outside the margins, it's not that simple. You don't get to just open up the space for us, ask us to come in and then we all get along. Because we're also a product of our experiences in this country as well. We've seen things, we've been through things. And the messages we've received from the mainstream are not, hey, everyone, come on in, we love you. It's, hey, everyone, come on in and act like us. It's talk like us, walk like us, smile like us, shake hands like us, make us feel comfortable. Because the moment you make us feel uncomfortable, you're out of here, buddy. That's been the message from the majority. Now, you could say those are generalizations. There are study after study after study after study, and I can direct you to the resources that have captured the voices, specifically of people of color, in specific cases in which they're going into white-led or white-run institutions and dealing with these very same issues and why they don't feel a sense of inclusion. Harvard has a great book with loads of different articles about these issues, studies, articles on these particular issues. Why? Because we need to begin to talk about and acknowledge how deep this goes. Folks, I would love to tell you that it's as simple as just, if you add more seats to the table, everything goes away. It's just not going to happen that way. And that's why this work is so incredibly uncomfortable. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I could just make a quick point. I know
Sure.
Duggan from Domus made this point last time. You know, I experienced him going through the uncomfortable process of, you know, essentially asking for long time white board members to step down to make space. And I recognize that an alternative strategy could have been to grow the board, but I think that perhaps would have diluted, you know, the potential power of oncoming board members of color. So, you know, I think there's that. And I recognize, you know, I'll make a quick personal statement. I know this isn't my own therapy session, but
no, go with it.
You know, I've taught and led schools and where most of the students were African American, and have had conversations with you know, Black educators who have said in no uncertain terms, you know, it shouldn't be me doing those things in front of the classroom or leading a school, and I agree with it. And you know, I'm given, you know, Jamal, what you're saying around, you know, the historical atonement that needs to be done, you know, I'm in agreement that, you know, I have to do something. And then I have the uncomfortable thing of having to pay bills and, you know, support my 3 kids and all that stuff. So that's why just this larger conversation has always been helpful to me, because it's, you know, I get stuck there.
Yeah, it's really challenging. Here's the question I'll raise for the group. If the solution was just expanding the size of the tent, then why have the current diversity efforts as it pertains to people of color specifically failed? We know that the tent was expanded, to Michael's point, when affirmative action became the law. We know that there were seats created, that the tent was expanded, and that there was supposed to be this influx of people of color, in particular women, who were supposed to come in and take all these seats. Now, we saw white women benefit from these efforts, but we didn't necessarily see people of color always benefit from these efforts. So why do we think that those efforts have failed? And let's even take that as far as looking at our boards. Now, our boards are not going to be reflective of an affirmative action policy per se, but why do we think that the diversity efforts that have been in place for the last 20, 30 years, even at the board level, expanding the number of spaces, opening up for more people to come on, why have they failed? If it's just a matter of opening up the tent, why does it continue to fail? And I think the root of that response, if we start to say, well, those efforts haven't failed, but we just can't find people, we're making excuses. If we start to say that the people are the problem, then we're being racist. So let's just be careful. If we start to blame this on, because I've been in groups where people have said, oh, well, we've opened up the tent, and then people of color don't want to join. They can't find it. We can't find the qualified ones. The CEO of Wells Fargo just made that mistake, right? So let's be mindful of how we're thinking here, because oftentimes when we start to answer those questions, we start getting into the root of our own racist ideology. I want to invite in some folks who have not shared a lot, though. I want to invite Yvonne and Cheryl and like Cheryl, I know we've had a couple conversations. I know you have some perspective on this. Lucy, Anika, I want to invite some folks in who have some different offerings that we can bring to the table. Cheryl, come on in. What do you think are the reasons why diversity efforts have failed in the last 20, 30 years?
So Jamal, and I do have some experience in this area, so I really think it depends on the sector you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I'm the CEO at North Community College. It's a state agency. I think the recruitment efforts have failed really because of our recruitment policies. And we have not really, we've demonstrated a commitment in our words, but in terms of aligning the policies and taking very clear steps to recruit faculty of color, we've been lacking in that area. In terms of the board work, I wouldn't necessarily say in my experience with FCA that our efforts have failed. I mean, I'm a Black woman. I've been on the board for about 8 years, but we have, I think, only recently started to lean into the work of recruiting other members of color. So I'll be interested to see how some of my fellow board members respond to this, because I actually don't think that our efforts have failed. I think we are on the right track and will continue to engage in some of this work.
Thank you. And let me say this. This is not, I'm not posing that question for you to necessarily look at your board and say, how has my board failed at this? I'm talking collectively. We know that the data suggests that diversity efforts in the nonprofit sector, specifically at the board level, have failed. And we'll show you some of that data in a moment. But I'm curious to know, why do we think that exists? I mean, you know, what are some of the things that are standing between? And frankly, if it was just a matter of making more spaces, we've done that in the sector for a long time. Mary, you want to come in? Mary from One Community?
Yes, so a couple of things. One, when you're talking about a board, you're talking about, you know, enlarging the tent is something. I think there are a lot of the spoke and have indicated that's not necessarily the answer, and it certainly is not. A couple of things are really important from a board standpoint, and that is, look at your governance structure, empower the people you bring in, impose a rigor on your board structure in terms of whether it's term limits, whether it's in leaving a vacancy until you find people of color, just standing up for it. You will find people if you do that. So those three things, give people who you do recruit power, put them in chairmanship positions on your, don't just add them to a committee, give them a position of responsibility where they actually have a voice for directing how the organization is going to go. I believe that term limits create the opportunity for refreshing the board and being intentional that the people you bring on are going to be people of color who you're going to whom you're going to give a voice. Just some thoughts.
Powerful. Thank you. Anyone else want to lean in? This is open. I've got.
Yeah, I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I think that so far institutionally, it hasn't worked because the why has been weak. There is a quote, a number we need to fill in. There are laws of equality that we need to in schools. We need to have certain number of kids that are minorities. And there is not a real thinking behind what's the reason of why we want to do this. We just need to get there and attain that. Personal opinion.
So I hear you saying that the why still is not, which brings us back to the root point, is that if we haven't really explored or have a deeper understanding of the why, then we can't inspire the real actions behind it. Anika, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I do. I would like to build off of something that Cheryl shared regarding policies. So I think, you know, we have like these cookie cutter policies or these cookie cutter documents or statements that don't reflect BIPOC people and Black people. And so even if Black people get into certain spaces, you know, I think this was mentioned before, but we have to kind of conform to this policy, and this policy, bringing it back to what Yvonne just said, isn't a part of our why. And so we quickly find ourselves exiting.
And I also
I think diversity. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Virgil. I was going to say that I also think that it goes back to the stories we tell ourselves as a community, as a society. It's more comfortable to say we have to do it this way because at the board level, this is how we can raise more money, or this is how the structure of what we want to achieve is going to work best. And we don't really think about the why. It just, these stories become part of the fabric of who we are, and we don't stop ourselves to really dissect them deeper.
Yeah. I also think that we can't practice avoidance. So I know that it's really hard for us to wrap our minds around the idea that people who have power and privilege have to let go of some of that power and privilege in order to allow others in. But that's a part of the process here. That's a part of the work. And acknowledging that is just as important as acknowledging the fact that over time, there have been people who have been denied access to that power and privilege. They've literally been denied, that we have put barriers in place to keep people out of our boardrooms and out of our institutions and out of living in the same communities as us. The acknowledgement of that is equally important, right? So there's all of these things that have to happen at once. And again, this can get very nuanced because we want to feel good about this work and we want to have everyone feel like they can work together, and that's all great. But part of how we inspire people to act and get them engaged is with a why statement that really gets to the heart of us understanding the root causes here, the real issues that are at stake here, and also recognizes that there's a level of personal suffering and institutional suffering that you have to go through to atone for the fact that you've gotten in this place, that you're in the place that you're in. Now, some of you will say, well, we were not directly responsible for this. And, you know, Dr. Beverly Tatum says you didn't create air pollution, but you got to be responsible for doing something about it. We've got to stop running away from the realities. Like, yeah, your board might be homogenous. You didn't set out to design it that way. But if that's what you have, you got to call that out. If you've only got 1 or 2 people of color on your board and you're like, yeah, we want more people and they just won't come, you got to call yourself out for that. What is it that you're not doing? To Mary's point, there's a lot more that you can do, but oftentimes there's a hesitancy to do it that's rooted in a lot of other things. And a lot of, at the core of it, it's the loss of something. It's the loss of power. It's the loss of privilege. It's the loss of prominence. It's the loss of status that keeps us from allowing for people to take something that we believe we deserve a right to. Ooh.
Jamal, you said diversity. Why has diversity failed?
Yeah.
I believe it's failed if we peel the onion because of the power, as you mentioned in the beginning. And it's manipulated by that power. When we set these programs for diversity and whatever, if you're a small business owner, if you are for college admission, they set these programs, but they're supposed to have a certain meaning or a certain statute. But when they start seeing a problem and people start complaining, then the people of power, they manipulate what was supposed to be something different. So we never reached that goal because the people of power are now manipulating the things that were supposed to happen.
In what ways do you think that they're putting these manipulations in place? And this is important when you use the word manipulate, because we know that society embraces manipulation. Manipulation is part of how we get what we need, right? And for good reason. Like, we do sales manipulations. We tell people you get 2 for 1, you get 40% off, you get this off. We manipulate all the time to get what we want. So when you talk about manipulations in this case, in what way are you using that, and how does that negatively impact some of the work that you're talking about folks need to be doing?
Can I speak from a small business owner perspective?
Sure.
As a small minority-owned business, the government has set up programs for small minority business so that we can try to get an equal share of the business or government contracts that are out there. When we attend these meetings, there's supposed to be representatives from these entities or these companies that say they're interested in our business. When we get there, we show up, we're not asking you to give us anything. We think we're sitting down with some of the decision makers. When we get there, they say the decision makers aren't here, give us your business card and we'll pass it along. We call that, or no one ever calls us. And I've received calls after I complete these programs to become certified. I get calls from white people saying, I understand you have this certification. Can we use your business, or can we partner? So that now they want to look like a minority business, but use me as the contact. So those are all workarounds. That's what I mean by the power is over the program, and the power is manipulating the programs also, which is restricting success within these diversity programs that are in place.
It's powerful. Wow. Wow. Anyone else want to lean in? I think that's really powerful, Virgil. Anyone else want to lean in with any thoughts on this? I think this is interesting because, and this happens with every group that I'm in front of, when we start getting into the conversation about power, it gets sticky. Because there's some that are like, well, this is not about power. And then there's some that go, well, I don't really want to talk about that because, why should people have to let go of anything? And then there are some that are like, you know what, we might have to actually deal with this issue. For years, we've been talking about diversity without necessarily talking about how diversity programs and initiatives oftentimes fail because of the way in which the power structure designs these programs. Is that they're designed to really benefit the power structure. And so here's the thing, and this is where we talk about meaningful equity work. Meaningful equity work means going against the status quo. If the status quo is safe and does the things the same way they've always been done, we're gonna get the same results we've always gotten. If all we do is make people feel good and say, just bring everyone together and shut up about it. Don't talk about the dynamics of power. Don't talk about how even in our boardrooms, there are people that we respect because they have a certain look, a status, that there are people that we are inherently biased towards and we believe that they bring more value to the boardroom than others. If we don't talk about those things, then we don't get to confront the real issues. Yvonne put a message in the chat saying acknowledgement is an action. And you're absolutely right, Yvonne. That's why this work is so meaningfully hard. If we just got right to the, yeah, let's just put a policy together and let's just make a diversity strategy or let's put term limits in place, but you don't get the why and you don't really acknowledge the true depth of the problem, then your efforts will fail. Your efforts will fail. And failure in the sense that Anika brought up, which means that you get people in the door, but they don't want to stay there. And Anika didn't raise that point without that doesn't have, like, she has evidence for that. There's lots of research out here that supports what Anika's saying. That the revolving door specifically for people of color in a variety of industries exists because inclusion is not a strategy. Equity is not happening in a meaningful way, but you've achieved your diversity goal. The optics are there, but none of the other components are there. And people of color are not stupid. We get in, we see what it is, and we get out. We're like, bye, why should we stay here? Now, I'm not saying that exists for every single person of color in every single situation. To Cheryl's point, she's in a different dynamic. So I don't want to make this an attack on you. We're not attacking institutions. We're trying to get you to look at your system in a slightly different way, okay? And to acknowledge that the way, even within the beauty of your intention, that there may be some real negligence with regards to the experiences that people other than yourself are having in those systems. Yeah, even though you mean well, even though you want everyone to work together, even though you don't want to talk about what people have to let go of in order for others to gain something, it's part of the equation. It has to be discussed. People have to let go of something. Michael, I want to give you, Michael from Domus, I want to give you a chance to lean in a little bit because it was mentioned that at Domus that you all made this decision to kind of, or have been going through this kind of challenging kind of decision around letting people go. Is that what they were saying? That you was kind of letting board members go in order to create space for folks of color or people who represent the community? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, and just doing the work that Domus has done over the year with the Equity Institute and doing a lot of this stuff, very similar to what you're, talking about at this meeting, we just kind of took it very seriously. And the board chair and I, with the executive committee said, look, well, listen, we have to make some changes and it can't, and we went back and forth. Well, why don't we just, add more people to the board? And that way there'll be no hurt feelings. And we made the decision. Actually, it was the board chair who said, I don't think we should do that. I think if we have to, if we're going to really be committed to equity and inclusion, then we're going to ask board members, we were mainly white, to get off. And somebody said, oh, is that because their term limits were up? And that was not the case. So the governance committee went through certain things, and then the board chair, which I appreciated, said, I said, listen, I'll do it. And he said, nope, that's the role of the board chair. So he called each person up and said, we appreciate your service and support. Somebody had been there 12 years, 9 years, 8 years, and somebody 3 years. And it was extremely difficult. I mean, really very difficult. So, and because of that, when you talk about loss and what happens, it's a lot of hurt feelings, right? And as we all know, all of us who do this work all talk about trauma and being trauma responsive. And a lot of that work is all steeped in honoring loss. So Domus has gone through a lot of loss, both at the board level and then on personal relationships that obviously board members and certainly myself have had established with these board members for years. So there's still a lot of time for healing, but we still believe in our heart and soul that it was the right move. And it has opened us up for looking at, again, to continue to diversify the board. I think the other part too is that somebody spoke about, the words we use is like, you can shoehorn any answer you want or any response you want to make it look good. And we had a leadership team meeting, and one of a woman of color on our leadership team said, like, listen, I don't want Domus to be part of the pageantry. like coming up with the racial justice statement saying, we believe in this and our website looks like this, like, and she said to me, like, listen, you know, Mike D, I want to hold you accountable if we ever start to get in the pageantry business. And I said, I am down for that. If it looks like we're just doing it for show, then you need to call me out on that stuff. So that's kind of, you know, where we've been.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share a couple more slides here before we get to sort of our bridge work that we're going to work on over the next few weeks. But I want to talk a bit about what we've seen in the nonprofit sector related to diversity efforts. Robert from Domus made a point in the chat. He said, your point of optics versus real diversity struck me, as I've seen that diversity breeds diversity in organizations. We'll talk about that in a moment. To some degree, that's true, that diversity will yield more diversity. And in some cases, if there isn't a culture of inclusion and equity, that diversity can actually not yield more diversity. It'll lead people to spreading the word that this is not a place that you want to come into because of the issues in terms of how they deal with people who are different. But in the nonprofit world in particular, just to kind of drive in here with this board work, hold on a second. Come on, here we go. All right, so we know that BoardSource has been tracking board diversity levels since 1994. And what we know is that over the last almost 30 years, that the levels of diversity at boards have remained relatively unchanged. And so when we ask that question of why have the diversity efforts failed, this is what we mean, that overwhelmingly chief executives and board chairs don't like the makeup of their boards, but yet they're not necessarily fixing the problem. And that those that are having some progress with this, about 25% of boards that are making progress, it's because they're placing a high priority on demographics and recruitment. So they're making it a very specific choice and plan to go after specific groups that have been left out. And to really be intentional about their recruitment efforts, strategic about their recruitment efforts, even to that point made earlier about being strategic about anti-racism is very, very important. So this is all a part of that, right? We also know that changing board practice doesn't rank as a top 3 priority for most boards. When you think about the top 3 things that you're trying to do as a board, does changing the status quo, does changing the board inclusion and equity and diversity stand out as one of your top 3 priorities? Whether it's strategically over 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, how much of a priority is this for you? And so, you know, the thing that we run into a lot is organizations that say that, again, they state it as a value, we want this, but they're not necessarily doing the work to achieve it. And that, again, diversity alone is not necessarily enough, that inclusion and equity have to be there. And those are 3 very different but interrelated concepts. But, you know, the optics of diversity, having different people at the table is one thing. Having folks feel as though they are actively involved, meaningfully engaged is a different issue altogether. Giving some level of control and power to those individuals is a different issue altogether. And in some cases, what we find is even with diverse boardrooms, in the way that really should happen, there's more conflict. That you have people who bring in unique perspectives, ideas, and insights, and it should lead to folks feeling a little bit more conflicted, a little bit more of a challenge in the boardroom. Sometimes that doesn't happen because people are more focused on the feel-good element or the collegial element of it. And when we have a lot of people who think like us or move like us or talk like us and walk like us, well, geez, there's not a lot of conflict there. So when we start talking about bringing diversity to the table, oftentimes that opens up room for additional conflict, but that's a good thing. You want to see that as a part of your opportunity for growth. We grow, again, that relational cultural theory, we grow through conflict in relationship. I'm going to share this also. The second problem is really linked heavily to the idea of tokenism and bias in practice. So I'm not going to show that video right now, but that video, which I'm going to put in your classroom, is a woman who has been serving on boards, a Latinx woman who's been serving on boards in Springfield, Massachusetts, who has talked about from her experience, her unique lens, the feeling of being tokenized, the feeling of being in spaces where she was only there because they wanted a woman of color in the room, and that it made the white folk in the room feel good to say we have diversity now, but she didn't feel included. She didn't feel like she was a part of the culture. And as a result, it wasn't something that she was comfortable with. She wasn't happy in those dynamics. And so she used her TED Talk to talk a little bit about some other ways that you could approach that work. But tokenism is a big issue. Calling people into the boardroom for the sake of the optics, calling them in and saying, hey, we just want to look good. That's not okay. To Mike's point, You don't want to become a part of the pageantry of folks that are just doing this for the sake of doing it. And finally, you know, I want to talk a bit about this, what we call the self-reinforcing cycle of majority white boards and staff. And so when there's a lack of diversity that exists in the board, it feeds itself. It feeds itself. A homogenous board feeds itself, because we often ask members of that board to go find people that could serve on the board. And whether we realize it or not even just by race, not even just by gender, but if you did a number of categories across the board that were descriptive categories about you, you'll find that if you wrote a list of people that are the closest to you, that most of those people have the same descriptive characteristics as you. And I'm not talking about family. I'm talking about friends. I'm talking about colleagues. The people that we connect most to more often than not are people that have more characteristics that are similar to us than not. In other words, we attract, like attracts like. It's an affinity bias, and we all have it. And it can be based on a variety of things. It's not just about race. You know, the first thing that happens usually when we raise this point, and we've done an activity called the Trusted 10 with groups. And, you know, I've done it with folks, and they'll go, well, you know, my Trusted 10, they're not all white people. And I go, that's fine. We weren't saying that everyone has nothing but Black or white people in their network, but what about the other qualities? Age, gender, religious background, socioeconomic status, educational status. You start looking across those boards and you start finding that you have a lot of similar characteristics. We like ourselves and we connect to people that remind us of us, right? So and that's a part of who we are intrinsically. So that affinity bias plays out. We recruit in networks of people that are basically like us. And we bring more of us into spaces. We trust more people that look like us. And when you start talking about the dynamics of race and gender, it plays out in a more extreme way in that case, right? And this continues on. We end up with this lack of diversity. We end up with a lack of diversity in the candidate pool. And then it feeds itself some more. And occasionally you get some folks that are diverse. And you know what happens? When I've sat in the process to be recruited for boards, I feel like from the moment I walk in, they're looking at me like, wow, we got a Black person. This is great. And it makes me feel weird. I'm like, I don't know what I'm really here for. And I ask real questions, you know, like, what's your goal? What do you want from me? Like, be real. And people don't have really good answers. To Yvonne's point is, I don't understand your why. I don't get why I'm here, right? It may make you feel good to say you have a diverse perspective in the room, but that maybe I don't want to just be the voice for racial reckoning. I don't want to be involved in your collective healing process. Maybe I just want to talk about accounting, you know? The idea is that we do a poor job of recruiting people who are folks of color, and then the cycle feeds itself.
Well,
go ahead, Virgil.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was
Sure. So then at the center of this is a lack of strategic focus on equity, inclusion, and belonging. We talk a lot about diversity. We leave out equity. We leave out inclusion. We leave out belonging, which is the sense that people actually feel a connection, a sense of community in the places that they're in. We leave all that out the equation, and we go, well, we've achieved our diversity. And then it becomes the revolving door. So these are all things that we have to grapple with. All of this, what underlies all of this issue, unfortunately, in this country is racist ideology, which are the ideas that have been socialized and domesticated into us about race. When that's paired with structurally racist practice, the way that we design policy, the way we practice, the way we build culture with a lens for race, whether we are intentionally trying to be racist or not, we are still building those structures in ways that are exclusionary, not intentionally, some cases unintentionally, in many cases unintentionally. But the fact that they exist doesn't, whether it's intentional or unintentional, doesn't remove the fact that it has an impact. And it feeds the cycle. It continues to run this way. And so the work that you're doing in this initiative is to disrupt this cycle. And so the first question that I want you all to really ponder over is, how are we going to disrupt this cycle? And at the root of it, right, the real beginning question that we asked in the beginning is why? Why disrupt the cycle? I've had groups that have said to me, you know, shoot, I mean, everything's going great. What's the point? Why should we? Why should we disrupt the cycle? Our board is doing well. We're making money. We're keeping our doors open. We seem to be doing great. Why disrupt the cycle? And that's why I said, get to the why. Because if you don't have an agreement, a shared understanding that disrupting this cycle is important, if you can't connect to the reason why, then you're never going to do it in a way that's meaningful or sustainable long term. Okay, let's keep going. So we're talking about basically 3 buckets of sort of solutions here that we want to make sure that folks have in place. One is a willingness to acknowledge the history and the magnitude of systemic and institutional racism, not just in our broader society, but how it shows up. You know, the nonprofit world doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like it's here as a part of our nation, it's a part of our world. You know, the charitable sector is huge. And the reality of it is that it's just as racist as other parts of our country, other sectors. As well-intentioned and well-meaning, as mission-driven as many of our nonprofits are, structurally, ideologically, racism has been a driving force for the nonprofit sector for a very long time. And so understanding that is important. How that racism shows up and manifests itself in our boardrooms is equally important. This is why we're talking about racism, and we're not just saying, well, the answer to diversity is to do the following: go and advertise in a magazine for Latinx folks. Like, we're not giving you the cookie cutter stuff because that stuff hasn't worked, folks. You wouldn't need to sit in a program for me to give you a list of to-dos. This is about getting to the root cause and talking about why it's really not working from a root issue. The desire to not give up power, the fact that the nonprofit community is rooted in wealth, and philanthropy is run by wealth, and the wealth is held disproportionately in this country by white folk. And that even those well-intentioned, well-meaning philanthropists many of them are racist. And that their racial views can sometimes trickle down, that the deficit mindset that we have about people of color, and particularly the clients of color that we serve, impacts our ability to ever see them as an equal that can serve on our board. Whew. And if you can't call that out, you can't bravely move forward with this work. As Michael said, you just become another participant in the pageantry. So how this manifests in our nonprofit boardrooms and organizations is important. Why it continues to exist in our organizations is important. And this is not me beating you up. This is me saying, hey folks, let's have a come to reality moment. Let's just talk about this, because if we don't, nothing changes. We've been doing it the same way over and over again. It hasn't worked. And then we get to the how. We commit to addressing the issues of power and control. We talk about how diversity can help us to do that, how sharing power is important, how seeding power is important, how changing policy and practice is important. We talk about these uncomfortable conversations around culture, dominant cultural practices, universal cultural practices that many of us have adopted but don't necessarily always agree with. How did we develop our culture? Where did it come from? Pace yourself. Ask those questions. What is white supremacy culture? Not white supremacy culture. How are we participating in that? How does it show up in our organizations? We're gonna have you think through this as we go through this process, and ultimately what we want to see is a transformation, not a transaction. Diversity is transactional. Expanding the tent, 3 slots, let's get some people of color in there, transactional. But it avoids the bigger work, the harder work of challenging your bias, expanding your perspective, and making meaningful change, meaningful and sustainable change that exists outside of the individuals in this space. In other words, you want to inspire something that exists so strongly and so much in the fabric of your organization that if you leave, it continues. That transformation is not based solely on the personality of the leader in the moment. That all of you are participating in shifting policy and culture and practice together. And that is what you're here to do. Now, I might have done this group a disservice, because you might be like, this feels like a bait and switch. I thought we were going to come in and talk about some nice diversity stuff, and now we're over here talking about anti-racism and racial justice and social justice and all these other things. This doesn't feel like what I came in here for, and I'm sorry to hear that. But I want you to win. I want you to come out with a meaningful, substantive plan that's going to actually shift the dynamics of your community, your organization, and lead you to getting the diversity that you want. Okay? Everything that we've shared with you is something that we've done with other groups. And we continue to see this as as a shifter, a game changer, a transformative way to approach the work. But ultimately, we're not responsible for you doing it, you are. So as we take you through the process, you're really going to be challenged to unpack a lot of these issues individually and collectively. There's some real tough conversations you have to have. All right. So we don't have the time today for this, but we are going to give you some homework, some what we call bridge work, because we believe in having things that you can all do to connect from one session to the next. And so, and don't worry, we're going to send this out. So all of you will get this in email. So don't feel like you need to write it all down right now. But some reflective questions. You all completed a pre-journey reflection survey. And we had the survey, the results, the summaries distributed to the executive directors today. And what we're hoping that you do between now and I think it's the 25th or something, when we come back together, I'll look at the date in a moment. But I want you to really spend some time with your team, with your equity core team, discussing the takeaways from those reflective questions about are we ready? What's our level of readiness to engage in this work? Not so much are we ready, but what is our level of readiness to engage in this work? Are we ready to have hard conversations that examine our philosophies, our culture, our practice, our policy, our partnerships? Are we willing to have those discussions? Are we willing to look at the things that we do that reinforce inequity? Remember that if in order to do this, you have to be willing to endure a level of inconvenience, of personal suffering, of institutional suffering. That's how you grow. I don't want to sell you on this is going to be easy. So these questions are designed to make you think about that. We'll send the questions to you as part of your bridge work. The process that you're going through right now, just so we're clear, you've already formed your teams. We're about at this level right here where we're beginning this meaningful acknowledgement work. We're at the root stage of this. We're discussing the why. We're talking about what's happening here. We're talking about what we're seeing. We're talking about why we want to do this work. We're engaging in some difficult conversations here as a group. There may be some things that were said today that you agree with, some things that you disagree with. That's okay. The beauty of diversity is the diversity of thought, right, Carl? Right? You get to think different. You get to approach it different. You get to have different insights and perspectives. You're not supposed to all think one way. We challenge each other that way. That's a beautiful thing. In this process, we begin with acknowledgement. We then move into a stage of the process where we start doing the action planning, and we show how we're going to create a vision for racial equity in our boards. And then we put together a strategy and a plan. And we'll help you, we'll guide you through that part of the process. But the transformation part, that's you. That's where you're off and running. And so we'll be with you throughout most of this. And Lone Pine has committed themselves to helping you get through the core pieces of this project. And we want to see you get through as well. Okay. And we'll make sure we get this deck out. So don't feel like you're missing anything if you don't get it all in your notes right away. The other part of your bridge work that I'm going to add, so we talked about those questions that we want you to do some reflection on. We'd like you to finalize your collective why statement. We'd like you to spend some time moving into a formal why statement. Now, Michael made a good point from Domus when he made the point about those racial justice statements that have shown up on all the websites. We stand in solidarity with, like those conversations. We're not doing that, okay? That's not what we're doing right now. And I'm not knocking those statements because some of those statements have some value when they're actionable. What we're doing in this process is we're developing the why. We're linking that to a vision and a vision statement. And then we're going to tie that into how our values show up in the action plan. So this is designed for the plan, okay? Not for your website. So finalize your collective why statement over the next few weeks. Again, this is work you're doing offline, away from here, in your own separate breakout room, right? I'm also going to send you a link for a equity inclusion assessment for your board. Every one of the organizations that has participated in our initiative has taken this assessment. Every member of the equity team is welcome to take the assessment. The question that often comes out is, should we share it with the larger board? I don't think that's necessary right now. The core members of this team can feel free to complete it. In some cases, you have members of the team that say, well, we're not on the board and we don't have much perspective we can offer to the assessment. In some cases they do, some cases they don't. But for the most part, everyone who's a part of this team, we would encourage you to complete that assessment. It takes about 15 minutes to do. It's about 7 different sections with about 5 questions in each section. So we'll ask you to complete that, and we'll make sure that you get the results. So you'll have more concrete data to support your why and your acknowledgement work. At this point, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to create some space for us to have any remaining points, Q&A, or what we call appreciations and regrets. So if there's something that you just want to say you appreciate a point that was made by someone in the room, you're welcome to do that. If you want to express a regret, maybe over something that you were misunderstood around or something that you didn't get to say, you're welcome to do that as well. So this opens up the floor for the next 5 minutes. Anyone's welcome to jump in.
Jamal, you referenced several studies and several resources. Are you going to be sharing those with us?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you'll have go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I'd like to see some of the data that you were referring to.
Absolutely. So we do a combination of things. One, we provide lots of articles and other handouts and resources and things that are out there. But we'll also reference, we do a lot of reading, and you can't really see from back here, but our books are steady back here, lots of research. So what we'll do is we'll provide the names of those books, and you're welcome to go and do your own research on it. So we think it's important that, one, we provide you with some research, but also that you're also willing to go out and do your own research. With our guidance, we'll point you in the right direction, but there's plenty of data out there. So please feel free to help yourself.
And how will we receive that?
This will all come in the form of what we're designing. We have basically, it's almost like a Google Classroom, but it's basically like an online shared location where everything will be in that particular location. So Elizabeth is going to help to put that together, and we'll get the invitations out to the group leaders, the executive directors, and they'll be able to share the information with you all. So it'll be a link. You'll be able to get in and get access to all of this information. So, yeah.
Jamal, will you be including the video of Michael Jr.? I think that's really powerful when you're trying to get to the why. Yep. And how important it is.
Yep. So I'll include the video of Michael Jr. You got it, Lucy. That'll be in there as well. We use that in a lot of our workshops as a way to kind of catalyze folks. The other thing I would recommend is Simon Sinek, Start With Why. It's a great book by Simon Sinek. Some of you probably already read it. It's a bestseller. Great book though. But the whole book is about rooting yourself in the idea of why, being purpose driven. Powerful book for business professionals and leaders.
Say the name again, Simon what?
Simon Sinek, Start With Why. In fact, here it is. Right? So a really good book called Dancing on Live Embers, which I also recommend to you all. And then the book that I mentioned from Harvard is, I believe it's called Work and Leadership, but it's the Harvard Business Review's anthology of studies that have been done specifically on Blacks and Black experience in the workplace. Plenty of good data in there that you can tap into to learn more about inclusion and engagement efforts that work specifically for folks of color. So we have lots of research out there. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, Jessica. Yes, the session is being taped. We'll make sure we provide the link for the recording, so you'll be able to download that if necessary. And you'll have a copy of the deck as well. So yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Yvonne, I appreciate everyone that shared and their courage to step into the uncomfortable. Absolutely. That's a real appreciation. Is folks that are willing to step in. It's not easy. We're in a large room. You just met us. You know, you might have some trust issues. Like, I don't know you like that. You always ask me these weird questions. But like, we got to talk. That's how we get things started. So we set it off, and we know that we won't always agree, but that's what we're supposed to do. You know, my heart is in the right place. Your heart is in the right place. We work together. That's how we go. Anyone else? Appreciations or regrets?
Just wanted to appreciate again the Lone Pine Foundation for allowing and creating the space for all of us to be here today. So thank you to Lucy Ball and the whole team at Lone Pine Foundation. for everyone on the sharing and being here and showing up to work on anti-racism.
Thank you, Anka. Appreciate that. And thank you to Lone Pine. And you know what? Thank you all for trusting the process. This is not easy work to do. It's a lot to take in. You stepped into some deep waters a little bit today, but you did well. So we'll see you the next time. We're coming back together on, I believe it's February 25th. I just want to make sure that I confirm that. Yeah, February 25th is our next session, 9 to 12, and we'll get into the next level of the work. So in the meantime, we'll send you your bridge work and we'll go from there. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.